America was secretly stealing oil while publicly demanding peace. That is not an accusation. That is what Reuters documented in detail with shipping data, satellite imagery, and 11 separate sources. While the United States Navy maintained a public blockade on Iranian ports, American military assets were quietly orchestrating one of the largest covert oil transfer operations in modern history. 92 ships, 2 secret locations, 17 simultaneous transfers happening on a single day, and not one mainstream outlet led with this story. Because if they did, the entire narrative of American moral authority in this conflict collapses entirely. What the media is telling you is that the United States entered this war to stop Iran, to protect global energy markets, to prevent nuclear proliferation, and to restore order to the Middle East. What the media is not telling you is that while that war was being fought, American forces were running a shadow logistics operation that used the exact same ship-to-ship transfer techniques that Iran pioneered to evade Western sanctions. Washington was doing what it punished Tehran for doing, and it was doing it in secret. That is the story, and it is only the beginning of what has been deliberately hidden from you this week. Let us start with what is actually happening on the ground, because the picture is dramatically different from what your television is showing you. On the 16th of June 2026, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made an announcement that should have stopped the world. He said that Israeli troops intend to occupy southern Lebanon, not temporarily, not as a buffer operation, as a permanent occupation, modeled on Israel's previous military control of that territory, which lasted from 1982 until the year 2000. Read that carefully. While the United States and Iran are preparing to sign a peace agreement in Geneva on the 19th of June, Israel is publicly announcing the permanent military occupation of a sovereign Arab country. These two things cannot coexist. Either the Geneva process holds and Israel halts its territorial expansion, or Israel proceeds and the entire diplomatic framework disintegrates before the ink is dry. Netanyahu is betting that Washington will not stop him, and based on everything that has happened in the past 100 days, he may be correct. Reuters reported on the 16th of June that the United States military had been overseeing covert ship-to-ship oil transfers at the edge of the Strait of Hormuz since early May. The operation was conducted using aerial drones, water drones, and military helicopters. 2 specific locations were used, one off the coast of Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates, and one off Oman's port of Sohar. At least 92 ships were involved. On the 11th of June alone, just days before the peace deal announcement, 17 pairs of ships were conducting simultaneous transfers at those 2 sites. Now here is why this matters beyond the immediate scandal. This technique, ship-to-ship oil transfer at sea, is the exact method that Iran has used for years to move oil in violation of American sanctions. Washington called it sanctions evasion. Washington called it illegal. Washington used it as justification for crippling economic pressure on Tehran for more than a decade. And then Washington did it themselves, covertly, using active military assets to keep Gulf energy exports flowing while publicly maintaining a naval blockade on Iranian ports. This is not a minor operational contradiction. This is deliberate hypocrisy at the highest level of strategic decision-making. And it raises a question that nobody in the mainstream press is willing to ask openly. If the United States was successfully routing oil around the Strait of Hormuz using covert transfers, then how much of the supposed energy crisis was real? And how much of it was manufactured to justify continued military pressure on Tehran? That question does not have a comfortable answer. And the absence of that question in Western media coverage tells you everything about whose interests that media serves. Now consider what Netanyahu's Lebanon announcement actually means for the Geneva signing. His statement that Israeli troops will permanently occupy southern Lebanon is not a diplomatic slip. It is a calculated move, timed precisely to satisfy his domestic coalition, while the world's cameras are pointed at Switzerland. His coalition partners, ultra-nationalist ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, have been demanding this outcome for months. They want a permanent Israeli military presence in Lebanon. They want the complete and irreversible dismantlement of Hezbollah. And they want it achieved before any broader diplomatic settlement locks in a framework that would constrain future Israeli military action. Iran has responded with a direct and public warning. Tehran's military command stated on the 16th of June that if Israel continues its offensive in southern Lebanon, Iran will retaliate, and that continued Israeli aggression will force Tehran to reconsider its participation in the Geneva process entirely. This is not a bluff. Iran has demonstrated throughout this conflict that it follows through on its stated red lines. The April ceasefire collapsed within hours of being announced because Israel struck southern Lebanon immediately after the truce went into effect. The same dynamic is now in play again. The formal signing is scheduled for the 19th of June. Israeli ground operations in Lebanon are continuing, and Iran is watching every strike, counting every casualty, calculating whether Washington has enough actual control over its partner to make the Geneva Agreement worth more than the ceremony surrounding it. The third element of this week that has received almost no serious coverage is what Iran did domestically on the 16th of June, while Geneva was dominating every headline. Iran's judiciary executed two men. They were identified as Javad Zamani and Abul Fazl Saidi. The official charge was Moharebeh, waging war against God, a legal mechanism used by the Islamic Republic to eliminate political opponents, protest organizers, and civil society leaders. Both men were described as armed leaders of the early 2026 unrest, the mass protests that swept across Iran in January and February of this year, in the weeks directly before the war began. The timing is not coincidental. The Iranian regime is sending a message to its own population at the precise moment when international attention is maximally focused elsewhere. The message is unambiguous. The Islamic Republic has not been weakened by this war. It has not been liberalized. It is not preparing to open itself to political reform in exchange for sanctions relief. It is executing its opponents while its diplomats prepare for Geneva. This matters enormously for Western audiences, because there is a persistent narrative in British and American media suggesting that this war has weakened the Iranian government to the point where internal political change has become possible. These executions are the regime's deliberate and public answer to that narrative. The Islamic Republic will take the sanctions relief. It will take the unfrozen assets. It will enter the 60-day negotiation window. And it will use the resulting economic stability to tighten its grip on domestic power, not to loosen it. Now consider these three developments together, because separately they are significant, but together they form a complete and deeply disturbing picture. The United States is managing a peace process with one hand while concealing its own strategic contradictions with the other. Israel is exploiting the diplomatic window created by the peace announcement to accelerate its territorial objectives in Lebanon before any formal framework can constrain it. And Iran is using the ceasefire as cover to neutralize internal dissent while positioning itself for a prolonged negotiation it fully intends to win. The Group of Seven summit in France issued a joint statement from Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, warning that continued Israeli strikes in Lebanon risk destroying the fragile ceasefire framework entirely. Trump did not respond. Netanyahu did not respond. Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon continued through the night of the 16th of June. Now my two predictions. First, Israel will not halt military operations in southern Lebanon before the Geneva signing on the 19th of June. Netanyahu cannot absorb another political concession. His coalition is already under severe strain. His domestic credibility, damaged by his own public admission that he did not know the details of the deal Trump signed with Iran, cannot withstand what his base would perceive as surrender in Lebanon. What is most likely is that Israel will formally separate its Lebanon operations from the United States-Iran Memorandum of Understanding, arguing the two conflicts are legally and operationally distinct. Whether Tehran accepts that framing is the single most consequential variable in the next 72 hours. Second, the covert American oil transfer operation will become Washington's most serious diplomatic liability within the next 30 days. Iran's intelligence services have unquestionably reviewed the same satellite imagery and shipping data that Reuters published. Tehran will not raise it publicly while frozen asset negotiations are active, but behind closed doors, Iranian negotiators will deploy America's own covert oil operation as direct leverage against Washington's demands for nuclear transparency. Washington sanctioned Iran for doing precisely what the United States military was doing secretly off the coast of Oman. That is not a debating point. That is a legal and moral argument that Iran will use in every closed negotiating session to come. And in diplomacy, arguments without clean answers become concessions. Now I want to hear from you. Which do you believe is the greater threat to the Geneva signing? Israel's plan to permanently occupy southern Lebanon, or the revelation that America was running covert oil transfers while publicly enforcing a blockade? Tell me in the comments below. If this analysis gave you something the mainstream media did not, subscribe to this channel. I will see you in the next one.